Welcome to the NonProfit Voice, a podcast series brought to you by NonProfit Pro, the go-to resource for nonprofit management and strategy. In each episode, we're going to sit down with leaders of nonprofit organizations, the people responsible for paving the way for our sector, along with key technology strategy partners who are transforming our industry. Here at the NonProfit Voice, we'll have refreshing conversations in which we will all learn more about the convergence of nonprofit and technology. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit our website to find more episodes of the NonProfit Voice. And you can download all of the NonProfit Voice episodes on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify. We will have all the links down below. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the NonProfit Voice. I'm Niti, Editor-in-Chief of NonProfit Pro, and I'll be your host for today's episode. And as always, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to dive into making data-informed strategies and why it's so vital for nonprofits. But before we jump in, it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest. Please welcome Ken Smith, President and CEO of Jobs for America's Graduates, and Sheri Chaney Jones, President and CEO of SureImpact. Hi, guys. How are you both doing today?
We're good, and I'm delighted the Smiths and the Joneses have come together.
Absolutely. This will be great.
So happy to hear it. So before we get started, I usually start by getting our audience more acquainted with our guests. So Ken, I'm going to start with you. Can you share more about your background and how you found yourself at JAG? And of course, more about the organization itself.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me and Jobs for America's Graduates as part of this. We're 40 years now in the business of helping some of the most vulnerable young people succeed, both in school, on the job, but in school meaning also in higher education. About 1.4 million of the nation's most vulnerable young people have been part of this organization over those 40 years. Today, we're in 1,450 locations in 39 states. The great news is that over those 40 years, we've been able to deliver better than 90% graduation rates while serving essentially the lowest performing 40% of the high school and middle school populations. We've also served in about 117 locations out of school and system-involved young adults. In addition to that 90% graduation rate, we're able to double the rate. This population is able to get full-time jobs and triple the rate for African American and Hispanic young Americans. Indeed, during the very depths of the pandemic, back on May 31, the largest and highest unemployment in the country was among 18 to 19-year-olds. It was 30%. If you were in JAG, it was 11%, about 3 times lower. And about 90% of our young people on May 31, when tens of millions of young people out of school, out of work, and out of options, 90% of our young people were engaged full-time, work, college, the military, or some combination. So I kind of backed into this opportunity, got involved with vocational technical education and some of the student organizations, such as the distributive education clubs and the Future Farmers and the Health Occupation Students of America. Helped to lead a nonprofit that helped high school dropouts get their high school diploma and find work. And a congressman was on our nonprofit board. Then Congressman Pete DuPont became governor of Delaware, asked me to be his chief education advisor. First assignment, Delaware had the second highest unemployment rate and the highest dropout rate in the country. And he said, we can do better than that. So we designed over 6 months with a team from business, government, labor, the community, and education, the JAG model, tested it in Delaware, proved it to the results you've just heard, and now spin the movie forward 40 years. We're in the scale and the impact that I've just described.
Amazing. That's such a great story. And, you know, it's funny because I actually grew up in Delaware. I spent my first 27 years there.
Really?
Yeah. So that's wonderful that you played such a pivotal role in that movement.
And we just elected a president, by the way.
I know. All right, Sheri, tell us more about you. Tell us about SureImpact, and how it is where it is today.
Yeah, thank you. So I never in a million years imagined that I'd be here talking on this podcast as a technology co-founder and CEO. However, I have always been passionate about using data to solve complex social problems. So I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist by training. And from a very young age, I was very curious about what predicted performance. I was always doing little social experiments around my high school, trying to understand, why did people choose to wear this outfit today? Or as I got older and more sophisticated, trying to understand, how do those SAT and ACT tests work to predict performance? And so that led me down a path to industrial and organizational psychology, where I thought that I was going to design selection tests for a living and help big corporations, hire the right employees and be more efficient and effective. But luckily, faith had a different path for me. And I found myself right out of graduate school in a job where I was helping individuals with severe and persistent mental illness find work. So I was using all the tools that I had learned in graduate school and applying them to case managers that were working with individuals with severe and persistent mental illness, or a very low income population that had lots of barriers to work, and helping them design this selection tool, if you will, that matched a person's diagnoses and challenges and barriers that may come to that to the right job, so that they could be successful in their career. So that then launched a whole entire career in the social sector, where I learned I could use my passion for data, predictive analytics, for research for good. And I worked in the state and local government for 10 years doing that internally for organizations. And I saw the impact that the organizations that I served were having when we implemented outcomes and data-driven strategies to our work. We were increasing our fundraising, we were changing policy at the state level, and really making a long and lasting community impact. And I wanted to share that information, that knowledge that I'd learned, this passion that I had with the world. So in 2010, I left state government to start my other company, which is Measurement Resources Company. And it's an organizational development and consulting firm that works with government and nonprofits and brings these high-performing data-driven strategies to the sector. And after 10 years of working with these organizations, they were coming to us. We love the insights that we're having, that your firm is providing us, but how can we have lasting impact? How can we have that data at our fingertips whenever we want? We don't have to hire a consultant to evaluate the impact of our program. And so I listened to the needs, and with a team of developers, we developed SureImpact. SureImpact is a SaaS platform. It lives in the cloud, and it helps nonprofits better track, measure, manage, and communicate their unique social impact.
Awesome. And that is now more important than ever.
Absolutely.
All right. So like I said in the beginning of this podcast, Ken, Sheri, and I, we're going to talk about data-driven strategies. We're going to talk about data collection, different metrics, data challenges, and a lot more. So let's get into my first question. And let's start with the basics, Ken. I would love for you to kick off this question. What does it mean to be data-driven?
Well, it's a favorite phrase that a lot of people use, and it's actually a really great question that you raise, because we need to be specific about it. I think the best answer is that almost no major decision should be made without data of some kind. That you've got to have the data to make a decision around which the organization may depend, the services you're going to be providing, the costs that are going to be associated with it, the impact it's really going to have, both on the lives of the people you're trying to serve and the role that the staff or other partners have to play. It's also, we have found, that this was true when we started, but it is absolutely now an essential feature. You're not going to be able to make your case to a funder, public or private, unless you've got data, compelling data, data in depth, and data over time. So it's actually now an essential feature. And typically now we have to show our funders, again, both public and private, that we actually are doing these things, providing these services, delivering them in this way, based on the data that demonstrates the kind of effectiveness, certainly the numbers that I just gave you. Finally, that it's about the only way we've ever found to be able to realize that you can do things better, because the data will tell you that. And things change over time. Look at what just happened here in the past 9 months. Good heavens. Our whole organization turned upside down in what has always been a very in-person, very relationship-driven means of success in our frontline staff working with young people. Now it was all done virtually. What's the data? What's the difference? What impact? Well, how did the students react? How did the frontline staff? So the bottom line here, I think, is that data has to inform every decision. It always means you better also ask the right data. It's the old garbage in, garbage out theory, that you've got to make sure that you're asking the right question, getting the right data, so you're making the right decisions.
Great. And Sheri, what are your thoughts?
I totally agree with Ken. And I should have mentioned in my introduction, as part of me always being curious, I wrote a book. It was published in 2014 by Josie Bass called Impact and Excellence, where that is exactly what we studied. We studied, what does it mean to be a data-driven, high-performing social sector organization? And so for my definition, some of the criteria that I think need to be included in an organization to be called a data-driven organization would be someone that uses data on a daily basis to drive decisions. It's not just something that, oh, my funders say that we need this data and I'm going to share it with them at the end of the grant cycle. But it's actually embedded as part of the organizational culture, and it's used regularly in order to support decision making. So yes, we need to communicate our impact to our funders. That helps us scale and grow our revenues. But we also need to use the data to decide, where are we going to, double down, if you will? What programs are we going to invest in more? What programs are we going to stop doing because they don't really drive the impact that we have? What partners should we be partnering with in the community because they can come alongside of us and support our mission in a way we can't without them? And I think that there's this, and Ken alluded to this too, but I think a data-driven organization also has this pursuit of excellence, this continuous improvement, and they're using data as their feedback loop, as their way to get smarter, to become more impactful, to grow and to scale. So my big takeaway is that organizations, we learned that 87% of nonprofits have data, but that doesn't make them data driven. It just means they have information living somewhere in their computers. It's actually putting that information to use that makes an organization data driven.
Sure, you brought up a really good point. So these days with technology at our fingertips, it's so easy to collect data. But like you said, just because you have data doesn't mean you're data driven. So can you kind of talk about the biggest data challenges that are facing nonprofits today?
Sure, absolutely. So I think some of the biggest data challenges that organizations face is that is the sustainability. It's really around, how do we sustain these efforts? And again, so oftentimes organizations might have a great intern, or they might have a great staff person that they rely on to manage a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and collect the data. And so while that person is employed by that organization, they have all the insights. But as soon as that person leaves the organization, now there's no kind of systematic way to collect the data. And so those organizations that are excelling at being a data-driven organization are those who have automated their systems, and they are leveraging technology to make sure that they're collecting the right data, they're embedding their decision-making in it, it becomes part of the culture of the organization instead of just something that it's not just data isn't just a word. It's actually how the organization lives and breathes and drives their decision-making. And so I think the biggest challenge nonprofits face today is making that leap. It's increasing their data capacity and their ability to have technology help automate that. It's also the data literacy. A lot of nonprofit leaders come into this sector because they want to make a difference, which is awesome. And I joke in my presentations that, and many of them become social workers because they didn't want to do the math. And so you hear like statistics and data, and it scares people. It doesn't have to be scary. And technology really helps increase data capacity, data literacy, and bring the numbers to life and make it more meaningful. So if we can get over the capacity and the fear of data, organizations can do amazing things. And it sounds like Ken and his organization has figured out how to overcome those challenges.
Couldn't agree more. Ken, tell us, what kind of data challenges is JAG facing?
Well, let me put it in the context of nonprofits in general, then let me take it to JAG. Even though we just got done discussing all about data, I think one of the biggest challenges nonprofits face, too many of them don't have much of it, or they don't have it in a way that actually helps to make their case. It's just amazing to us when we get in front of state legislatures, when we make our case to private funders, they'll comment, gosh, you've got all the data. So many groups do not. So I would say one of the big challenges is for nonprofits to get their data act together and get the data that's resident inside their systems, as Sheri described, and find the right ways to get the analytics done, which is the second thing. You've got to be able to efficiently and effectively analyze the data for the purposes that you need for internal management, you need for external funders, for helping to your frontline staff to do a better job in whatever roles they're playing. The third one, and the challenge all of us as managers have, is we always want more data, always want more data. But there's a point of diminishing returns. In the early years of JAG, when this was all done by paper and pencil, I was literally hung in effigy in some classrooms because they thought I was the guy that came up with this terrible, burdensome, paper-laden process of data collection. So you have to trade off the important, crucial role the data has with how much time, effort, and money it takes to get it, how much you take frontline staff away from serving people, in our case, who've got 1,000 other things that they important to do. So I'd say number one is the lack of data. Second is the ability to effectively analyze and utilize it. And third is the time, effort, and money it takes to collect it in the first place.
Great. And I think this is a good segue into our next, topic, which is, data collection can be tedious and time consuming. What are your recommendations for nonprofits on some of the best practices for nonprofits to use with data collection?
So first of all, benchmarking works here. I mean, every nonprofit, Sheri just described her journey with it, and you're hearing a little bit about ours at JAG. Listen to how others have done it, avoid the mistakes they've made, go make new ones. The old ones were no fun. So I guess learn from others how to do it. The beauty of technology today is it's so much more efficient and so much better at doing the internal analytical work if you ask it the right questions, of course. So I think picking the right technology solution, of which there are hundreds to choose from, a big challenge. And here again, I'd rely on colleagues in the nonprofit sector for help who've been through it, made the choice, and the choice that they've had really valuable. Absolutely essential decision is what's hopefully the data platform, but if not then at least the 2 or 3 data platforms you're going to have. The other thing in terms of data collection is the timeliness of it. what data do you need and when do you need it for what purpose? Management, efficiency, effectiveness of frontline staff, meeting funder requests. So you got to build in the thinking about what do you need and when do you need it.
Fabulous. Sheri, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, we, based on studying hundreds of nonprofit organizations and working with them as they transition from being what we call an outputs only nonprofit, meaning they're just focused on counting how many people they serve, to an impact centric organization where they're really focused on making decisions that move their missions forward. We have these following recommendations that we think help an organization move from that output centric to impact centric. And the first is that data in the process of collecting it, analyzing, and using it must involve all levels of the organization. You've got to get your data collection and use out of just the grants office or out of just the development office. It needs to permeate every level of the organization. And as Ken alluded to, it starts with just defining for your organization, for your mission, what are the right outputs and outcome data and performance data that tells your own story, that guides your own efforts, will help you make the best decisions. And I think we definitely should learn from our peers, but we also need to do what's right for our organization, because every nonprofit is very unique. And so making sure that you can tell your story in the way you want to, and you have the right data to prove your impact. And so you just want to, that's the very first thing, is you have to define what are those key things that you want to measure. And then once you've defined those, making sure that you do have secure, easy, and efficient data sharing systems that will protect your clients' private information, that will give you insights in the real-time way, so that you can start to drive data-driven decisions. And making sure that those data collection systems are embedded within your natural workflow. We find that nothing kills a data-driven culture more is when the data collection mechanisms are very cumbersome. So really take into consideration, how do you naturally interact with your clients? When can you naturally collect some data on their progress, and really drive towards efficient and effective data collection is going to keep that sustainability of using data in your organization much better than if it's a very cumbersome process.
Great. So, I mean, going off that, Sheri, and this is kind of like a general question, and I think it's hard to answer because metrics, they vary from nonprofit to nonprofit, depending on what their mission and what their goals are or what they're trying to do. So can you talk about different metrics and, your thoughts on the more important ones that nonprofits need to be looking at?
Absolutely. This is actually my favorite question of all time. So we think that there should be, every nonprofit should think of their metrics in three kind of buckets. And the first is what was done. Most nonprofits are doing this. They understand who they serve and what services they provide, and they can quantify that. But I think it's important that we do provide, we also think about making sure we understand the demographics of those differences. And 2020 has highlighted this. It's provided a gift in some ways. It's not a great scenario that's brought about this gift, but we're to our public, more people are concerned about the social inequities and the social disparities. And so we have an opportunity to use the data, our demographic data, to look at our outcomes through a racial and gender lens to ensure that we are not contributing to the disparate outcomes. But in order to link our outcomes to our participants, we need to understand who we serve and be able to link those two. The second bucket is how well was it done? So these are measures of more qualitative measures, but around cultural competency, provider relations. We've done a lot of research and learned that sometimes what's the difference between a positive outcome for a client and an unsuccessful outcome is the fact that the clients did not perceive that the organization responded to their needs in a culturally relevant way, or they did not view them as a provider or a helping relationship. They saw them more as a authoritative or a patriarchy type relationship. So making sure that you're not missing the mark on outcomes because of a quality metric, making sure you have that participant feedback and that quality and satisfaction data, as well as some efficiency metrics around, timeliness and always understanding how much does it cost to deliver a particular outcome. And then our third bucket is how are participants better off? And those are more of your traditional outcomes. And I know a lot of organizations struggle with, well, what are my outcomes? What should I be measuring? So I have a really quick trick I want to share with everyone, and that is making sure that you use the why exercise. And so this is something we train all of our clients in, but asking the question, why do you do what you do? Why does your organization do what it does? And by naturally saying that, whether it is to increase jobs and improve education or reduce, mental health symptomology or increase food stability, whatever it is that your organization's mission is, just answering that why question, and whatever those whys are, you should be measuring them, because you need to prove that you are achieving the whys that you have. So those are my really quick high level advice of the different types of metrics nonprofits should have.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. I think asking why is something that everyone should do more often, because that helps. For me, I think it helps with decision making generally.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So Ken, I want to bring you in here and ask you what types of metrics you're looking at JAG.
Yep, Sheri, I think, did a great job of outlining those three key questions. So I'm probably not going to add much to it. I would say in our case, within those three, we're very focused on which of the services that are provided actually has made the most impact and what has not, which then helps drive decisions on, do you do more of the service that's having the most impact, or what are you missing? So I think, at a granular level, looking at each of the services and trying to assess just how important they are to the outcomes that you get, and being able to adjust the level of service based on that data. The issue, at least we're facing, and I assume most nonprofits, is everybody's watching the administrative cost line, and Charity Navigator and all of the aggregators of nonprofit data. It's all about cost effectiveness. So in this mix, I think being able to demonstrate cost effectiveness, that you get the kind of outcomes you get at a price that makes real sense, including hopefully the relatively low administrative costs to do it. We in our world are faced with that all the time. It's a cost per participant is the metric that gets applied to us by both public and private sector sources. So being really granular about using data, again, in the three strategic categories that Sheri provided, and being able to demonstrate cost effectiveness, number one, in terms of actually delivering the kind of outcomes that you're looking for, but the cost effectiveness of doing it.
Great. And so through this whole conversation today, we have talked about how nonprofits can use data to drive decision making, but I kind of want to talk about this at a higher level. Ken, is there anything that we haven't covered today that you would say would be a data tactic that you would use to drive decision making?
So in our world, there's both the national data, but then you have to be able to demonstrate it in Ohio and in Delaware and in Nevada and in Mississippi. And then in some cases with some of our funders, it's in Detroit or it's in the Mississippi Delta. So the level of detail, the geographical impact in our case of where we've had the differences, because that money gets driven, that funds our state affiliates and to some degree nationally because of that. So I guess I would add that we haven't discussed being able to arrive at data on a macro middle, and a micro scale that's consistent with whatever either is driving your funding or driving your work. I think the second thing is that you've got to pick a very few data points that you want to present to the outside world and stick to them and repeat them over and over again. You know, this backs to the theory, you got to tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. So you don't want to mix a lot of different data in your presentations. Had a recent example, one of the staff members said, well, everybody knows we get 96% graduation rates. And I said, actually not. I think out of 330 million Americans, 329,999,000 do not know that we get 96% graduation rates. So we need to keep driving home that statistic, and the one with employment and the one with full-time engagement. So thinking about the best uses of the data in terms of defining your organization and its results and sticking to it and being consistent in that, we found to be very important to define the organization in the minds of the multiple decision makers. We have to address.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first I want to say absolutely, Ken. I agree with you 110%. I love that. The conversation about, hey, we're about graduation rates. That's our mission. That's what we measure. And we're going to communicate that. We're going to measure that. And then the partners, the funding partners, the donors, the, collaborators that are also about supporting increased graduation rates are going to be attracted to the organization. So I love that. I love inherent in that particular story is that he's changed the accountability conversation from essentially outputs to outcomes. He's not leading with, he does speak to how many graduates they've served or how many participants they've served over the years to talk about scale, but he's coupling that with the impact his organization has had and comparing that to just the national average. And it's just an example of how you become data driven. And I'm sure behind that, and most organizations behind that, you share those high level impacts with your external community, but then internally to continue to drive that type of those results across the country, it doesn't happen overnight. Organizations need to be using their data every day, setting goals and benchmarks and monitoring performance so that they can sustain that level of success. I think Ken also brought up, and during the pandemic, when a lot of nonprofits had to switch their modalities, those that already had data systems in place, this really did, obviously the pandemic phased everyone, but the ability to monitor now, does our virtual platforms work as well as in-person used to do? We have one client who came to us because he was realizing there's a lot of expense in some of his program delivery, which with the pandemic he no longer had. And it appeared that people were receiving as good or better outcomes in this the new pivot that he had to make. And so that's, to me, what makes a data-driven organization and one to be driving decisions. And it just is embedded in your.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So Sheri, so while I have you on, Ken, you kind of alluded to this earlier. You said not to, try to be more specific about what types of data you're putting in your communications or in your presentations. So Sheri, can you explain a few ways nonprofits can use data in its communications with donors, staff members, board members, grantors, et cetera?
Yes, absolutely. I think moving towards explaining, going to the outcomes, I obviously am harping on that, but I think it's so important that in your donor communications, that the focus is on outcomes and impact. Our own research has showed that organizations to do that are significantly more likely to raise more money. And also Penelope Burke research has found that 67% of donors now favor that nonprofits communicate measurable progress on what's being accomplished with donations. And that's up from 36% just 7 years ago. So there has definitely been a shift in what donors expect to hear. So really focusing on what is that demonstrable impact, what is that social return on investment? You know, if I donate $500 to your organization, what is that impact going to be in someone else's life? Ken, I'm sure you could make statements around, you know, if you give us so much money, we're going to increase the lifetime earning potential of one of our clients by a certain amount, because you're taking people from, you know, potentially being a high school graduate only to now a college graduate. So having those types of impact stories, but then also making sure that you bring the data to life by wrapping the emotional stories around that. So we find that that's the most successful combination, is when you have impact statements and the data to back it up, but then also wrap it around with a great anecdotal a story or so, you know, example to bring it to life.
Great. Ken, what are your thoughts?
All the same. You can tell we've been in this arena for a long time and never actually have met, but have had completely similar experiences. People, you know, everybody's a storyteller. I mean, in every discussion, you know, people are storytellers. They listen to stories and that's how they get it in their head. So you've got to tell your story. Yes, you've got to absolutely tell it with data. But then you've got to put a face to it, as Sheri said, so that it's emblazoned in their mind what one young lady or one young man, the experience they've had, the impact in our case that Jack has had on their lives, and why it was so important to them and their colleagues or their friends and their family. So on the one hand, all of our data folks relish getting the data right and done, and it's crucial. But again, you have to embody it somehow in a story and in a face.
I love it. All right, guys. So I have one last question for you each, and this is something I ask every guest that comes on the Nonprofit Voice. Ken, I'll start with you. You know, we've talked about so much. We have so much to talk about today, and we talked about so much. If there's one piece of advice you would give to nonprofits from everything that we discussed today, what would it be?
So, number one, the most important time you're going to spend on data is deciding what the data is you need, why you need it, when you need it, and what is the right technology platform to get that to you. So the upfront time in defining with precision what data you really need and why do you really need it, so that you keep the cost, the time, and efficiency to that focus on the data that you really need. Secondly, is that you want to always bear in mind the burden on the people collecting it, and that there is a point where it's not worth it, or it's just not worth the amount of data that you need. We certainly hit that in our early years when so much of it was paper driven and just an extraordinary amount of time. I mean, sometimes full-time staffers had to be hired to just do the data collection. So you took it off the hands of the, so obviously all changed today, but be very mindful of the cost, psychological, human hours, and actual cost for securing the data. And finally, is to have the data in a way that has impact internally, in making sure you're constantly improving what you're doing and having better outcomes at lower costs, and how you present that data to the outside world, to whoever it is that you're beholden to or that you need to have on your side. And you can't take your eye off the data ball, and you can't take your eye off the process.
Well said. And Sheri, of course, what advice would you give nonprofits?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a journey. That's the one advice that I would give anyone. You know, if you're moving from an outputs only organization to a impact centric organization, just recognize that it's a journey and it's going to be a evolving process. But the first step, if someone listening is like, I know I'm an outputs only organization, I would just say, first step, identify those 3 questions. What do you do? How well do you do them? And is anyone better off? Make sure you have metrics in those 3 buckets to answer those questions. It doesn't have to be, like Ken said, you don't have to have 10 metrics in each of those buckets, but a few in each of those buckets Then systematize how you're going to collect it, making sure you understand the workflow of your staff. So as to Ken's point, you're not overburdening your staff, and it is just a regular way you do business. Utilize technology to the best. I mean, we live in this era and time where technology is our friend. It's relatively affordable now, so use it. Find the platform that works best for you and adopt that. Reporting, having a way to see the data in real time will really increase that cycle of accountability towards outcomes, as well as people using data. The quicker they can see it, the better it is that it will be used in your organization. And the faster it can be communicated to teams to use that in their organization. And then always refine the process. Just accept the fact that this is the evolving and learning process. It's part of an organization's culture. You can tweak it. You can change your measures if they're not the right thing. You can change your programs. But that's why we have data in the first place, is to continuously learn and continuously improve. And so accept that as part of your data-driven culture as well. But I just want to leave with this parting thought that in today's society, having data and being a data-driven culture is no longer a luxury. Study after study showed that organizations that have impact-centric measures are more likely to be successful. They're more likely to scale and be sustainable. And when we're approaching a time and a period in history where the nonprofit funding landscape might be a little tight in the coming years, having that impact-centric data will make all the difference. So if you've been waiting, the time is now.
Well said. All right, well, that about wraps it up for today's episode. First, I want to thank our listeners for taking the time to listen to today's episode with Ken and Sheri. And Ken and Sheri, again, it's been so fun having you on, an absolute pleasure. You guys both have such a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and it's so clear in the way you present yourself, the way you guys talk, and the confidence that you have. So thank you so much for joining me on the Nonprofit Voice and sharing your insights and expertise on making data-informed decisions for nonprofits.
Okay, thank you, Neil. This is great.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
And on behalf of Nonprofit Pro, we will see you in the next episode of the Nonprofit Voice. Have a great day.